Hey, what's up guys? It's Nick Davenport here from Mind Body One, and today we're going to talk about 8 rules to consider when doing your mental training. Now, I work with all types of populations, from athletes to students to businesses to doctors, the list goes on. But these are things I want to consider, and I want you to consider them too when you make your mental training, because at the end of the day, the goal is to make yourself or your clientele be able to perform as best as possible. So these are things to consider and how we do to get our clients' minds right. So let's get into it. Number 1. A cool drill doesn't necessarily mean a good drill. Now, it's great to catch up on the latest trends and see what your favorite athletes or performers are doing, but we got to consider what is the best practices. Granted, you can have fun, it can be entertaining, challenging, but it still needs to make sense. But sometimes I see things where people are adding all different types of elements, different tasks, overwhelming the client or themselves so it looks cool or it gets a lot of attention, but does it really make sense to do it? And these are things we want to consider, because when I work with my clientele, I always think, if I have a high-level athlete, I always use Dustin, Poirier, one of my top UFC fighters, what would he do? If it doesn't make sense for him, it doesn't make sense for anyone, because the goal is to be able to execute and perform better. Now, we can do this in many different ways, so it doesn't always mean you have to jump on the latest fads or trends, things that look good for likes or views on Instagram. That's great if you get them, but the outcome of the said task should matter more, and your client or yourself getting better is number 1. 2. Think simple, not easy. Now, I bring this up because a lot of times when people see my tasks online, or if they do them in person, they might say, hey, that wasn't that hard. Now, granted, there is tasks that I have that are way higher level and only certain people can do them, but the goal is really see how you can acclimate and accommodate to said tasks. Because if it is easier per se, or not as challenging, I want to see how consistently you can give me the responses that are needed. Because if you can't do that, does it really matter how easy or hard it is if you're inconsistent with your actions? No. So make sure that the task has a set protocol that isn't overly complex. Now, it can still be challenging, meaning higher cognitive load that's required them to do more decision making, more thinking, more reaction. That's fine. But we don't want to be complex to the point where there's too much going on. The client or yourself needs to be able to execute the task to give an outcome. 3, choose the cognitive skills or the mental skills that you're trying to train and make the task lead up to it. For example, if I want to train working memory, that's the skill I want to use, then I need to make a drill that goes to working memory. Working memory is the ability to hold information in real time while you manipulate it to make decisions, talking between what's happening right now and retrieving things from long-term memory so you can execute what's ever in front of you. Now, I could give a task, for example, memorizing colors. Now, if I want to do this, I could say, how many colors do I want them to memorize? Let's say 7. So I'll call it out auditorily: red, green, blue, blue, green, and so forth. I'm going to put a certain amount of time between each one, and that way I know, okay, they're getting enough time to hear it, enough time in between to make them have to recall it, and then give them maybe a buffer task in between. If I want to make it physical, I can say run 20 yards down and back, and then do the task and recall them. Or I could say your alphabet backwards: Z, Y, X, V, U, T, S, so forth, and then recall the colors. Now I know this drill involves recalling information, which is working memory. It's been rearranged because you've done to another task, whether it's physical or mental, and I have to come back to it and recall it. So this incorporates the components of what working memory is, and I can make sure that that drill makes sense for it. Number 4, if you can't measure it, how do you progress? Now, if I'm given a task, say like a reaction task, let's say simple reaction when you're presented with a stimulus and you just respond to it. Now, if I want to measure my progression on this, I would need to know how long does it take me to respond to said stimulus, how many times I'm accurate when said stimulus is shown. For example, let's use the fit light system. There's times where a light is presented, say a green light, and you put your hand over it and put it out. That's reaction time. It goes down to the 10th of a second, so I know how long it took. Also, I can know how many times I missed if I was incorrect, or if I was too slow to get it, or I can see variance of how long it takes me in between each one, and if I'm consistently giving that response. These are all things we can measure. Now, granted, that's with technology, but that's no problem. We can do this with non-technological things too. Say, for example, if you did a tennis ball hand-eye drill and you had a one-legged and you had to transfer arms left to right as fast as possible while keeping your balance. Let's say you give yourself 45 seconds. The goal would be is how many alternations off the wall can you give in that 45 seconds? After you finish, let's say you did 22 alternations, you can say, okay, the next time, let's go for 25, 30, or maybe you do less, but the goal is, can I track that? Now, this doesn't require any extra equipment, but it's something you can measure and keep track of. 5, the physical component should not overwhelm the mental component. A lot of times I see people do an agility drill where they go left, right, back, forward, back through agility ladder, and then they'll do a hand-eye task with a tennis ball at the end, or they'll call out a number or a color, and that's great. You get overwhelmed with the physical component, your heart rate's up, but if you think about it, 98% of that task was physical. If the 2% that's mental, what are you really training? Granted, it can help, but if that's not what's the protocol, why are you doing it if your goal is to do mental training? Now, there's several ways I personally go about this. Sometimes I integrate physical tasks with the mental by doing them in tandem, meaning one, then the other. For example, we'll do a prowler push about 20-30 yards, and then after that, they'll rest by doing an after recovery, let's say with a Stroop task on some type of app, or maybe they'll do a quick reaction task and then go back to the prowler. This way they're getting that heart rate up, they did the physical task, the heart rate can come back down and they rest, but they're doing something that's taking cognitive load. Or we can do them simultaneously. I have a task on the screen where it'll be presented something like a Stroop color where the words written in incongruent ink, they got to run to a corresponding cone based off of the color they see. Now this way they're doing them at the same time, so it takes the ability to hold information, think, process, but simultaneously make the movements, which is very challenging. So you can either do it with the tandem task by doing physical then mental, or you can do them simultaneously when you combine them together. Either way, make sure it's not taking away from the mental skill. 6, the drill should be standardized for replication. What this means is if you measure out a task, whether it be with a light system, tennis balls, cones, make sure it's measured at the same distance, the same amount of time, the same amount of sets, reps, whatever it may be. Because if I want to track, like I said, progress matters by measurement, you want to be able to do the same thing. Replication is important for reliability. How do we know the stats mean anything? If you get a score of 5 repetitions in 20 seconds, does that mean anything if it was a different distance? Or if you do 0.3 of a second reaction time, but you change how far away you were from the stimuli, is it going to help you progress? Yeah, you got a score. It may be fast, maybe not, but it doesn't tell me much if it's not reliable to what you're trying to do. So make sure your drills and tasks are standardized. You have set measures that you use that can be replicated time and time again. 7, consider the emotional responses, physiological fatigue, and focus. Now, what does it mean with emotional response? Think about the subjective things that's happening. Granted, the objective things like numbers, reaction times, variance, accuracy are great because it tells us how fast, how long, how accurate, how consistent. But with the subjective things like body language, mannerisms, look at their self-talk. What are they saying during said task? This way you know, is this too challenging physically, mentally, or emotionally? If you see a drill where they're just totally frustrated or overwhelmed, maybe you can dial it back. Or if it's not challenging enough, you can add some other aspects to the drills and vary it so they're more emotionally triggered, because you do want to have some emotional aspect. Now, if they can adapt to it and be stoic and not let it get to them, that's great. But you can look at these different things because they're tight, tense, their body language, all this speaks volume. And if you can pinpoint this, you can do so much more to help your client progress and help you have a better relationship, how you communicate, how they perform. With the physiological aspects, this goes back to what I said, but not letting the mental be overwhelmed by the physical. If you take in consideration that if you want to do a task where it does fatigue them a lot, that's fine, long as the outcome is to see how well do they process under that fatigue. Now, if your goal is to see how well they are processing outright, you may not want to overwhelm them with the physical. Either you leave it out or you keep it minimal, because if you're expecting a consistent or high level performance from a mental aspect, you're going to diminish this by overwhelming them with the physical. And with the focus aspect, make sure the task at hand can be attended to. There's too much going outside the peripheral or the balance or whatever it may be. You got them covered one eye. That's fine if that makes sense, but if it's taking away from the said task, it doesn't need to be done or needs to be minimalized. Once again, remember, hold it to the highest standard. If this is something that you don't think a high tier performer will do, it probably shouldn't be done with anybody. Number 8, don't overexert yourself. They say if you try hard, you die hard. And this goes several ways. Where this can go for the actual client or participant, because if they try too hard and they're trying to over exaggerate how they move or how they process, this can actually make them do worse in their performance, because now they're overthinking everything and they can't attend to the relevant stimuli because they're too busy trying to overexert the physical form. And the other side of it is the practitioner. Don't overexert yourself in how you create these tasks. You want to be able to give the client or the participant a challenge, but you don't want to make it to the point it doesn't give a good outcome, it doesn't give a good end result. You want to make sure everything rides smoothly. You want to make sure they're safe, it's efficient, and they can accommodate and increase over time. Now, these were 8 rules to consider. Like I said, There's a lot of aspects to this, and it's not an exhaustive list, but these are things that we look at with Mind Body One with thousands of people we work with over the last 10 years, and we make sure that we hold our clientele regardless of their level. We hold them to the highest regard so we can get them better and have them improve performance. So thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. And remember, get your mind right.